Hi there, I'm Charlie Smith. I'm editor of the Georgia Straight, and this week on Georgia Straight Talks, I'm going to focus on International Women's Day. This year's International Women's Day has the theme Women in Leadership and Creating Equality in a COVID-19 World. And that refers to the challenges that women in particular are facing because they've borne the brunt of the job losses as a result of the pandemic. In the Georgia Straight print edition this week, we also focused on women in leadership, but it addressed the challenges that female politicians are facing as a result of social media and the harassment and misogyny they face. So one of the things I decided to do was interview 5 BC politicians, 3 veterans, and 2 who are younger. The veterans were Jenny Kwan, who was first elected to Vancouver City Council in 1993, BC Legislature in 1996, and then Parliament in Vancouver East in 2015 as the NDP MP. Hetty Fry, who was elected first in 1993 in Vancouver Centre with the Liberals, longest-serving female parliamentarian in Canadian history, and Elizabeth May, the former leader of the Green Party, who was first elected in 2008 and continues to serve in office. The 2 younger women that I interviewed were Christine Boyle, a first-term city councillor with One City Vancouver, and Melissa DiGenova, who's in her second term with the NPA in Vancouver on council, and she also served a term on park board. And what I heard was really shocking when I interviewed these women. I can start with Jenny Kwan, and she talked about the magnitude of racist messages that come into her office, either over social media or sometimes by mail. She once had a man storm into her office, screaming racist insults and threats, and she came out from her office, and her staff were obviously very frightened. So she stood between her staff and the man and said, "I'm going to call 911." And he still didn't leave, and only when she started dialing did he leave. But this is the type of thing that she faces. And once she had feces thrown on her property by somebody who was upset with what she was doing in the legislature. And so she was quite happy that we did this story because she thinks it shines a light on an important issue. And she's far from unique. The Interparliamentary Union in 2016 did a survey of female politicians in 42 parliaments around the world, 9 of them in Europe, 4 in the Americas, and then some in Africa, in Asia Pacific region, and 1 in the Arab world. And what they found was more than 81% of the respondents said they'd suffered directly psychological violence. And of those, 65% were of a sexual nature. In addition, there were 21%, more than 21% actually, had suffered physical violence. These are parliamentarians. And we also, one of the reasons I did the story too was I was prompted by that video that we saw in the storming of the U.S. Capitol where the mob was going through the halls and one man was going, "Where's Nancy?" looking for Nancy Pelosi. And it seemed to me as I was watching that if they had found her, she might have suffered grievous harm. And I think that also highlighted the misogyny that female politicians face. Another politician that I interviewed, Melissa DiGenova, talked quite openly about the threats that have been inflicted on her family. Her husband is a police officer, so the defund the police crowd, some of them have been making just horrific threats to her. She's also been an opponent of the proliferation of illegal cannabis stores, the unlicensed cannabis stores. So she said once after meeting a colleague for coffee, she was going back and 3 men met her, and one of them actually exposed himself to her, which she perceived as a threat. And she said later the Vancouver police told her that this was a targeted incident. And so that's some of the things she's had to deal with. Christine Boyle, her colleague on council, says it's very difficult to read the social media messages. She knows she has to because she wants to hear what her constituents are saying and what the voters are saying and questions that they're asking. But sometimes she has to wade through these horrific, hateful, and often misogynistic messages to get what she wants to read. And that's one of the things, the hallmarks in the Interparliamentary Union study was the ones who are more likely to be threatened are they're either racialized, they're either in the opposition, or they're often young. And Christine Boyle and Melissa DiGenova fall into that latter category. Hedy Fry has had lots of experience with this. She recalled having to walk in the Pride Parade with RCMP escorts because of the threats she was receiving back in the 1990s. But even more recently in 2019, during the election campaign, her campaign office was vandalized with graffiti. She's trying to raise this issue of the safety of women politicians and women journalists internationally. So she's a member of the OSCE, which is a parliamentary group of 57 countries, mostly in Europe. And in this role, she's bringing this issue forward. She's given notice that that's going to be a centerpiece of her report this summer. And she also says that this is not just a social media phenomenon, and you can look at things like the shooting of Gabby Giffords, the Democratic Congresswoman in Tucson, Arizona in 2011. Joe Cox, a Labor MP, was murdered more recently. So Hedy Fry says this is not just a social media problem. It's something that is happening in our communities. And another example was her colleague, Catherine McKenna, the Infrastructure and Communities Minister. Her constituency office was vandalized with vulgar slogans. Elizabeth May, who's also faced her share of harassment, and one of the things she says is a lot of the Twitter accounts she believes are fake, but she doesn't block people, so she gets the torrent of abuse and the threats. But she said there's a solution to this, and in her mind, the solution is to have the federal government bring forward legislation to have these social media platforms described as publishers in law, because according to Elizabeth May, that would make them legally liable for the content on their site, and she thinks if they were deemed to be publishers, that this would put a halt to most of the abuse that is being leveled at politicians in Canada. One of the things that the social media companies like to say is that they're not publishers. The people who post things do that, and they try to act like, well, we're almost like a utility. And they have that protection in the United States. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act does provide immunity to social media platforms if they're not directly posting themselves. So any comments, any abusive remarks, anything like that, they can't be sued in the United States, or at least lose a lawsuit, unless they don't take measures to remove content if it's offensive after being notified. But that's not good enough for Elizabeth May. It's not good enough for Jenny Kwan. She would like to see these social media companies be held responsible. In the meantime, everyone I spoke to really doesn't want this to dissuade younger women from running for political office and entering public life. They all said that, you can affect change, you can improve your community, and it's important to have a diversity of voices at the table. Hedy Fry made the point that men and women's brains are different. They have different lived experiences. You get better decision making when you bring everyone together. Melissa DiGenova was praising her husband for encouraging her to continue fighting against the online hate, because that will make a better world for her daughter. And Jenny Kwan, it's pretty simple for her. She just doesn't want to give in. And she says if you give up, they win. And she's not prepared to do that. And so Hedy Fry also made another interesting comment. She said it's not just up to women to challenge this online hate, that it's up to everyone. So she would like to see more male parliamentarians speak out about this. So it's an issue that's alive. The federal government is planning legislation to deal with social media platforms, but I did try to contact the Minister of Canadian Heritage, Stephen Guilbeault, to ask if he would ensure that these social media platforms are described as publishers in the legislation. I still haven't heard back from him. If I do, I'll let you know, but for now, no response. So I hope you enjoyed this report, Georgia Strait Talks. I'm Charlie Smith, editor of the Georgia Strait. You can find us online at www.strait.com. Thanks for watching.